Greetings, and welcome to Play or Not to Play. I'm MT. When I was growing up, I often played video games, though my parents were worried about just playing games that might not help develop my mind, and a few times got more educational games for the family computer. They usually picked games that were either pretty good, or I remember more fondly than I should, because I was a child and nostalgia and all that. In 1993, Sierra published The Incredible Machine. The idea, apparently, had been floating around for a while, with a version being talked about as early as 1984 for the Commodore 64, possibly based off EA's Pinball Construction Set game, which was released in 1983 and sold over 300,000 copies. Despite the success of the Pinball Construction Set, Jeff Tunnell was not able to sell his similar idea to publishers at the time. In 1992, Jeff Tunnell founded Jeff Tunnell Productions and figured this idea he had in his head for years was still worth doing, and Sierra agreed. The game was programmed in 9 months for $36,000 budget by Kevin Ryan. Supposedly, the same basic programming was used for several of the follow-up games in the series, only adding more puzzles and puzzle pieces to the future releases and updating the interface and graphics a bit. The game garnered a fairly positive reaction, with many at the time loving the puzzles and how well everything fit together. Computer Gaming World and Dragon Magazine, which was a Dungeons & Dragons magazine, and Electronic Gaming Monthly all gave it positive reviews. Even its re-release in 2014 for iOS saw a generally positive reception. Though I couldn't find a hard figure on sales, it had a famously low production cost for the time, with many games releasing on numerous 3.5-inch floppies, and games getting bigger and bigger as companies looked forward with anticipation of the day when CD-ROMs finally made larger games more cost-effective. It was incredible in its own right that the Incredible Machine required only one disc to play, which kept production costs down for every sale. The basic premise of the game is fairly simple. The game presents the player with an objective on a preset board and gives the player several different items to accomplish that objective. You drag and drop objects, hook them up to other objects, and have a bit of fun for feeling smart and figuring out how to make your own Rube Goldberg device. Importantly, the game ramps up at a steady pace, and the first levels introduce the important concepts so that the player can figure things out and not get overwhelmed. As it progresses, the game keeps adding more and more parts and building off the parts previously introduced. In addition, generally when the game introduces a new concept, they have it demonstrated beforehand so that if you just play the puzzle, it'll show you the beginning of the concept being introduced and you can repeat it later. Graphically, the game is slightly dated, but with two-dimensional side-on sprite graphics, it doesn't suffer too much from it. All the sprites for the puzzle objects look fine, and the actions the sprites make seem a bit dated, but interesting, almost cartoony even. The lack of a background does make the puzzles seem a bit sparse at times, but also make sure you're not distracted from the puzzle by things going on where you can't interact with. The audio of the game isn't great. The version I found had the audio cutting and rejoining at random, but even if it was playing steadily, it was just a bit of background music and effects when certain puzzle pieces are utilized, like the cannons, the guns, the dynamite. This is the kind of game that benefits from having a podcast or music going instead of just the game's audio. The controls are simple. Click on a puzzle piece on the sidebar and click wherever you want to place it on the board. Some of the pieces you can turn or change the dimensions by hovering over the piece and selecting one of the icons near it. This is pretty important for interaction between pieces, and figuring out what way things need to face is a big part of many of the puzzles. It does kind of have a bit of jankiness, however, when you try to turn pieces. You can get used to it after a while, but when I was younger or just coming back to it, it kind of irked me a little. One of the good things about the game is that the puzzles are small and self-contained. You can marathon a bunch of puzzles at one time, or just jump into it for a quick puzzle in between other things. You can also pass over a puzzle that really has you stumped and come back to it later, up to a certain point. The second half of the puzzles do require some of the early ones to have been beaten. Though I do like the game and had a bunch of fun coming back to some of the puzzles, the game does come off as a bit dated. If you're into pure puzzles, this game has a bunch of challenges to overcome, but there isn't anything else the game has to offer other than some excellent Rube Goldberg machine action, which, as far as gaming goes nowadays, is a pretty niche target. As for to play or not to play, I think this game will only appeal to fans of puzzle games. It is an interesting bit of gaming history, but only a one-trick pony. Its biggest draw is that it's so old that, and I don't know if this is legally abandonware or not, that it can be found to play in a browser pretty easily. There is also the re-release of the game for iOS for a couple bucks, and a mega pack of the later games on GOG. If you like the style of the game and are into puzzles, they can scratch that itch for you for a while. One final positive that I just recalled right now is that the game does have a password system, so if you do play it on a browser and you write down the password, you can go back to where you left off with that password. I hope you enjoyed the video and have a great day.